Hi there, and welcome to another BigLipz podcast. My name is Sam Macaulay Blair, and as ever, I am joined by the wonderful Catherine Maurice. We are two former and current film students with a lot of time on our hands and a platform to make a podcast. So here we are. This is episode 13 now, I believe.
Yep.
So you know it's going to be a lucky one. And this week we are discussing baits and codes, specifically in relating to like queer baiting and queer coding. We are sort of like we've picked like a sort of small catalogue of films that we're going to discuss, and we're just sort of going to run through them chronologically, discussing our own sort of subjective experiences and just different things that we know. There probably will be other examples that are brought up and pulled from, but just so that there was some sense of structure for this one, we do just have like films that we are going to sort of run through and talk about. So just before we actually kind of get into any of this stuff, I was doing some research earlier and found out about this thing called the Hays Code. Catherine, have you ever heard of it?
No, I haven't.
No, because the reading over it was reminding me of obviously the second podcast we done, the Video Nasty one. I was getting like getting a lot of reminiscing from that. Just obviously it was basically I think it was about the 1930s. There was suddenly a big push. I think there was like some scandals involving actors and whatnot, and maybe just the effect of like movies in general, because film was like a legitimate art form at that point, a legitimate source of like entertainment. People were going to the cinema and seeing like movies, and it was having like a cultural impact. So there was a big push across America, across various states by various senators and whatnot, to censor films, to basically like like decide what could and could not be shown. But I think there was like loads and loads of different bills drafted up by different politicians in different parts of America, and that obviously kind of got the film industry a little bit shaky in their boots.
Yep.
So their response was basically to self-regulate. So they came up with it. The guy that like basically I think was the head of the studio at the time was something Hayes. I want to say Daniel Hayes, but that also like I might be thinking of maybe getting confused with another person.
I couldn't tell you, I'm afraid.
But he basically, the idea was it was like a sort of they came up with their own guidelines so that they wouldn't have it looked like they were going to have like this horrible confusion of like loads of different little rules from like loads of different states, and like maybe like contradictory rules and maybe rules that would be changing a lot. And I think they kind of realized that would be an absolute nightmare to try and like it would just kill movie making. So I think they basically like proposed their own sort of internal set of like censorship like rules and regulations, some of which is like a lot of the stuff that you would expect. There's a lot of like a lot of it kind of comes down to like morality, and they wanted only like, because they were worried again about like movies doing damage and I guess being used to influence people, so they wanted like people to be portrayed as moral good guys. Any sort of like sin or negative action or intention was supposed to be punished effectively, or seen as like a negative thing, so that it would discourage people from sort of following that avenue. Obviously there was a lot of censorship to do with sort of sexually explicit content. I think from what I can gather, there was part of the rule was like, if a woman was like kissing a man, she had to have 1 foot on the ground, and I think the only reason the only reason that was specified was so that you couldn't have people kissing in bed, or in like a sort of sexual manner.
So I wonder if that's where like kind of like old fashioned like in Princess Diaries she calls it the foot pop, where like in old timey movies like one of their feet would come up.
So
I wonder if that's where that came from.
Not believe this, but I was watching a video earlier and they made reference to that they were basically saying that within the context of that rule, and to like draw a line under the point, they showed a clip from the Princess Diaries where she talks about that exact bit.
She talks about her foot pop. That's amazing.
Literally. So yeah, that was very, very nicely like observed there, or like recalled. But yeah, I think that very much is where that comes from. I think that was kind of like their way of like cheekily sort of getting at like the censors.
That's cool.
But like I had a quick look over like the list of like things. There's some weird ones. There's like, I'm pretty sure there's one that like specifically says that there can't be sexual activity towards someone who is a heavy, which is, I know. What
does that mean?
Exactly. You're not. You're also not allowed to. It specifically mentions that you can't depict white slavery. All other kinds of slavery, fine, but just not white slavery. Yeah, I mean, this is the 1930s we're talking about, but there's a lot of like sort of rough ones like that. But basically, long and the short of this, the reason I'm bringing this all up is because the general sort of way of thinking seems to be that this Hays Code, even though it was only in effect for like 20, 30 years, it basically has completely impacted, like even today, the way that movies are made and the way that like sort of people approach movie making and the way that you kind of like think about movies, because it was obviously like such an early and influential time in cinema, even though obviously a lot like, you know, boundaries have sort of been pushed more and more, and you're always going to get films that like push the boundaries. I think generally there is still quite like a conservative attitude, and like at least with like, you know, well-known sort of big studios and like big releases and whatnot. And I think that comes from the fact that it was effectively like baked into the mentality for a while. So even though the Hays Code hasn't existed for, you know, like what, 70, 80 odd years, it still is something that I think we're really still seeing the influence of. And that pretty much brings us to the fact that, you know, so obviously like talking about queer baiting, queer coding, the sort of quick history of that is really like queer coded characters. Apologies if you already know this, but they basically like the reason that people, the sort of generous reason for them existing is a way of like bypassing censors, you know, a way of like sort of almost like sneaking that content into movies. So yeah, it's basically like characters, obviously with like queer characteristics that are obviously never explicitly gay, but they are in there just as like a source of representation by any way that is like possible. Which brings us to The Little Mermaid, the sort of first film that we were discussing. So I've talked for absolutely ages now. Apologies, Captain.
It's all right.
I am curious, just what your sort of like, what sort of knowledge you have in relation to like obviously the queer coding and The Little Mermaid, and just what your sort of own personal experience and like opinions of it are.
I think obviously I think being a film student, especially like in this kind of day and age when everyone's a lot more kind of aware of different things like representation and things like that, is really interesting. So that's kind of, I think just from that is where your kind of understanding of like queer coding and queer baiting and things like that. And I think it's funny that you brought up Disney as well, because obviously it's such a massive name. Everyone knows what Disney movies are. Disney movies are a thing. And I think obviously we'll see as we kind of go on how they're kind of dealing with that, if they are. But and with regards to Little Mermaid, I thought it was really funny when you brought this up, because I've read previously in different or watched different things about it, and one thing that I always remember is that the character of Ursula is like, her actual design was based off of the drag queen Divine, who
that's right,
she's like, I'd say infamous maybe from that bit. And is it the movie Pink Flamingos that she was in, and there was a whole scene towards the end when,
I'll be honest, I've never seen it.
I've never seen it either, but I've read a lot about it, and basically, so is it John Waters, I think? And the plot of the movie is that they're having this competition to see who's the most like vile person in the world, and of course Divine is like getting pretty vile. But I thought it was really funny as well that she was like the inspiration for the villain in that movie. And I think obviously you'll probably know that Disney's got like a pretty bad rep for queer coding their villains.
Yeah. Which
in itself was quite problematic, because if you're like, imagine you were queer or gay or anything, and the only kind of representation that you saw was the villain, that would be very disheartening, to say the least.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. But that's kind of I thought it was interesting as well, because I watched a documentary about the guy who did the music for a lot of Disney movies. So okay. Little Mermaid was one of them. His name was Howard something. But he was gay. Howie. So he was gay, and he had to he felt like he had to kind of like hide it throughout the making of the movie. And then he did Beauty and the Beast as well, actually, which is interesting when you think of like obviously we might come on to this later, but like the live action Beauty and the Beast, and it's got that kind of like queer coding, where he looks at another man, but I'm getting off track. Yeah, so basically, in conclusion, that was kind of like my main takeaway from Little Mermaid and like queer coding and queerbaiting is that she's very much like Ursula. She's very much like that kind of, because drag queens are quite like overt and they're like overly dramatic and exaggerated and things like that a lot of the time. So it's funny that Ursula is very much like that. She has this big whole song and dance number, and she's got all her little minions that get in on it. So yeah, I think that was interesting. What's your thoughts on Little Mermaid?
Yeah, so I'm I guess inclined to be more generous when it comes to like this era of Disney films, and part of that is, I was obviously very young. I was born in the middle of the 90s, so like for me these movies just existed like an eternity ago. They feel ancient, effectively. So it feels like that was a very distant time, and obviously like attitudes and whatnot were very different. And I mean, that's not necessarily an excuse, because really like with a medium like film, it should be sort of pushing boundaries. It should be sort of pushing things. It shouldn't be last one to the trend. It shouldn't be last one to sort of like cover a big topic. It should be the thing that is like really pushing the boat out, and representation is really important. And again, like going back to, there are sort of two ways, as you mentioned, like Disney has a thing for queer coded villains, and obviously part of that I think does relate to the Hays Code, and the fact that obviously under the Hays Code, when you were making movies, if you had a character who exhibited like queer tendencies or characteristics, then that was seen as like a negative thing, and so they kind of had to be the villain. That was like obviously the way that like queer characters are almost like snuck in to movies. But yeah, like you say, like it is a dangerous road to go down, because you do leave it is very unfortunate for people who obviously are part of the LGBT community, because they are feeling like, okay, all the representation they have is negative, like you say. But also even within like the sort of heterosexual community, you then have the fact that like it does implant the idea as well that like these characteristics, these tendencies, and everything that sort of comes with that is a bad thing, is negative. You associate these things with villainy and with treachery, and that is also like a dangerous thing to kind of do to people, especially because like kids watch Disney movies and they watch them a lot, and they learn from them and stuff like that, because kids are just soaking everything up and trying to kind of make sense of everything, so they do get messaging, they do kind of get coded messaging and stuff like that. I guess like again going back to like the generous side of it, like I think with the Renaissance sort of called, like the Disney era of like Little Mermaid and The Lion King and whatnot, where they were like really trying to kind of like obviously like they hit it with like a bunch of like classic Disney movies that they were really trying to do, and one thing that they like really, one of their agendas was to try and have more interesting villains, more sort of captivating villains. So again, I guess the general reading of it would be that like they maybe weren't looking at it so much as like a moral thing, is like okay, the queer characters are the villainous characters, but maybe more like, okay, these are the characters that are a bit more free, a bit more boundless, and a bit more like, people are sort of more attracted to them. Like you remember these villains, they stand out, and a lot of people have a lot of love for them. The villains get their own songs and stuff like that, so they are.
Ursula's got an amazing song.
Yeah, exactly. So there is like a celebration that is going on at the same time. So I guess it is like a kind of complicated one, I feel anyway, with regards to like the Little Mermaid, where it doesn't to me anyway feel like an outright condemnation of sort of homosexuality. But again, that is I don't really have like a basis for thinking that. I am kind of just being generous and assuming the best of the people kind of making it, and going off the fact that it was a time when like it would have been a much bigger thing and a much more dangerous thing. And Disney is obviously like huge, like galactic right now. But it wasn't, it was always big, but it wasn't anywhere near the sort of size it is now back then, and obviously a lot of its success and a lot of its like power sort of came from that era and the success it had there. So again, I can't even like bring myself to, at least not without knowing exactly everything that happened and the mentalities and stuff. I feel like I do feel it's a bit unfair to like lambast them and to give them grief for it, because I do feel like they were really trying to kind of like resurrect their name almost, and which they ended up doing. Obviously, along with the Little Mermaid, the other one that I'd mentioned to you about like talking about was Hercules, with the character of Hades. So I guess now's a natural time to kind of segue onto that one. Again, what are your thoughts, feelings?
I think I think when you kind of like think of specifically Disney with like queer coded villains, it is people like Ursula, Hercules, maybe like Scar as well from The Lion King, and that ties into what you're talking about, this kind of specific era of Disney. But yeah, I think it's always difficult to tell, and like you were saying, like with it coming out in the time that it did, it's obviously we don't know what their intentions were. We don't know whether it was maybe like accidental even, because it's hard to tell because it was so long ago. There was different, like, things change, people become more aware of people who like just different people who need to be represented, different things like that, so it's hard to tell whether it was like a conscious effort to like queer code them, or whether it was just like, I don't want to say accidental because then that kind of like diminishes it, but yeah, I think Hades is definitely kind of in the same boat as Ursula, where it's a difficult one. It's especially
I think
I'm not making a very eloquent point, but
no, but I think one thing I guess you're getting at that is another thing that I sort of saw come up when I was researching. One thing that was sort of pointed out was the fact that I guess like when you mention like almost accidental or accidentally like queer coding these characters, a big part of the discussion is the fact that like, okay, like generally villains are kind of designed to be like the sort of flip side of the hero, and like for instance with like Hercules, you have like a deliberately sort of macho, strong, like male lead.
It's like hyper masculine,
yeah, exactly. So then like the sort of other side of the coin then becomes like a more effeminate, sort of like less, even like body type wise, Hades is completely different to Hercules. It's he's more about sort of cunning than the brawn, and the like they are very like they're designed to be opposites and like in contrast each other in like so many ways, even like the colors used on the characters. So in that way you very much could argue that it is an accidental thing, that it's not, that they're not, and it also, I guess the thing is, it also could completely depend film to film. Like as we discussed with Ursula, like they're very much, she was very much based on a drag queen, so that is definitely like deliberate queer coding. But with regards to Hades, it may not have been the case. It may not have been like the people creating it might not have been, or at least maybe not the person who like initially conceived of that version of the character. You then with movies you have so many people involved, from like the writers to the directors to the artists to the actors, the voice actors, the animators, the editors, that you really don't know. Like one of those people could have had the idea of like that Hades was queer, or none of them could have, or all of them could have, and there's not really any way of knowing for sure like exactly how deliberate these things were, how much of an actual like move this was, or if it was just like, well, they were going for the inversion of Hercules and that's just what they ended up with, and that just so happens to also align itself with the sort of LGBT community and what they're looking for, because I guess that's the thing, is like when with there being like such a starvation of representation, again especially back in this era, then you are going to kind of latch on to anything that you can, aren't you? Like you are
that's
desperate.
a good point.
So if there was more like LGBT representation going on in other films at the time, Hades might have been exactly the same, but it might just not have been something that anyone ever really thought about.
No, that's an interesting point. I think as well it probably has a lot to do with like the performance as well of the actor. Like you're saying, if so say James Woods decided, oh, I think maybe Hades is queer or whatever, then he could play it in that way. He doesn't need to tell anyone. He just needs to, and then it could kind of like go from there. But as I say, you don't. It's a weird one, especially like for it being so long ago. People weren't asking the same kind of questions they do at like press conferences and stuff now. So it's a hard one. I don't know.
Yeah, and I guess as well, like you don't have the internet, so you don't have like every morsel, everything that like an actor has said or anyone involved has said at any point doesn't now exist on like, because someone can't just pull out a phone and type it up and tweet it or write an article or record it. Like it was kind of like, there probably were like, as you say, people probably weren't asking these questions as much, but even if they were, it might have been like in a sort of more LGBT friendly environment, and it might not have escaped outside of like a small circle of like people, or it might even have been like a one-to-one thing that it was, any of this was like discussed and again just never really made it out into the sort of wider world. So that is a very good point about the fact that that it is really difficult to kind of go and now like dig up research on like, even though it's just like the 90s, it is still difficult to like dig up research compared to like nowadays, for a sort of multitude of reasons. I think people they're held, like filmmakers are held a lot more accountable now than they maybe used to be, so it's and again as well, like these movies are like iconic, and as you say, like they're almost like their own genre of film, like Disney films. But they at the time they were sort of breaking new ground, and I guess it was different in that sense as well, and they were kind of like setting up almost all these like tropes and standards that newer Disney movies are now like, I guess, held up in comparison to. But so overall, would you personally say, do you like, I mean, and I appreciate this, it could be a difficult one to answer, but would you personally say that you think that it's like positive or negative, like the way that they've sort of handled representation in these films?
I think that is a hard one. I think because they're so like iconic, people love Disney villains, and people especially love old Disney villains because they were a bit more villainous. Is that a word? Do you know what I mean? Like they were going for it. Like a lot of new Disney movies, you think about it now, they don't really have a villain. They kind of sometimes have a bit of an antagonist, but that's it. So I think it's a weird one. It would be difficult if you were part of the LGBT community and that was your only representation, because obviously like as a woman you've got like, fair enough, they're Disney princesses, but there's people like Mulan who saves all of China. There's like Belle who she's always reading. I always thought that was really cool. I don't know, it's a weird one. I think if that was your, I don't know, I like the Disney villains. I like, or the like Ursula. I think she's a good character. I think she's entertaining. Same with Hades as well. But I think it's weird. You wouldn't want to say that it's unfair to hold them up to today's standards, but like you were saying, there's like there wasn't, it's the same kind of accountability or even like understanding back in the day. So that is a hard one. What would do you have a more definitive answer?
Again, it's one that you almost like instinctively want to be quite slippery on answering, but I sort of said over and over, I'm inclined to be generous, and I think if you remove these movies, if you were just like actually just go back and just wipe out these films altogether and just everything stays exactly the same, but these Disney movies don't exist anymore, then I think enough people over the years have kind of like latched on to these like characters and villains and enjoyed them, and I think that there's optimistically I like to think that more positive than negative has come from these characters existing and the way that they're portrayed, because again I don't really feel like, and admittedly it has been a while since I've watched these films, these like two films specifically, but I don't really think that it feels like the movie has a lot of fun with them. It feels like the actors are having a lot of fun with them. It feels like they're always like a sort of enjoyable, charismatic performance and presence. And I guess the fact that they're not explicitly gay characters makes that almost kind of works in its favor, because it's like there's no like at any point is it like declared that that's part of their villainy, that that's part of their like evilness. It almost like has the advantage of like slightly separating those two things. They just sort of have like queer characteristics, and I do think that like I think enough people sort of love them. And again, given that like from what I was like researching, they were making a push to have more interesting, to have more sort of compelling villains, then I do think that even if it was accidentally, and even if like it would have been nicer if there'd been like, you know, more positive like queer representation, I do still think that it was a positive thing that they went for it.
That's interesting actually, because when you think about the like Ariel's character, by and large is pretty boring.
Yeah.
Especially when it's same with poor Hercules. Like he's a bit more exciting than Ariel, but they've not got anything on the villains. Do you know what I mean? So exactly. I think I've got a friend who always calls this the Mario problem, and he said there was like obviously the video game character Mario, Nintendo. Obviously on the rights to Mario, he's like their big mascot, and they're really protective of his image, so he can't ever, there's like such like a long list I think of like things that Mario can never do, and he can just basically, I think my friend was always kind of says that it's just resulting in he can't really have any characterization, because he can't have any flaws, you can't do anything interesting with him, he just has to be exactly the same, like literal two-dimensional character in all of his appearances, so that he doesn't ever like, so that he's never tainted or tarnished. It just like, and as much as like people know Mario and people love him, he's not that interesting as a character. You know, you don't go to Mario games for like the lore. You're not like, okay, well, what deep dive are we taking into Mario's psyche this time? So I think that is the thing, isn't it? Of like, they make such an effort to have these characters be like noble and moral and just, and that it does just, they end up like devoid of any real sort of personality or real like memorability in the same way that like the villains have. So I think that's a very fair point. Cool. So stepping away from Disney for a moment, the next film that I wanted to talk about, which I believe you have a particular affinity for, rightly so, is Dreamworks' Shark Tale. Yeah. So I'll let you talk away. I get slagged relentlessly for enjoying this movie, but I just think it's so good. It's funny. It's got a great cast. It's a good watch. It's a good story. Like, I was going to say fish out of water, but that's kind of bad pun. So basically, like, this is one of those ones, maybe like naively, you had just kind of watched and just always taken it at face value. It's not like the kind of film that you would write essays about or anything like that, really. And then it wasn't until I was doing research about it where I was like, how could I have missed that? That Lenny, the kind of main shark, he's the one, he doesn't want to be like the other sharks. He's quite timid, and he's sensitive, and he's a vegetarian. So it wasn't until I was reading into it where every single comment I read was like, am I the only one that thinks that maybe Lenny is an analogy for being gay? So that was embarrassing for me, reading up on that, because when I was thinking back, I was like, he's often portrayed as quite camp. He's like sometimes overly sensitive in a way that maybe is like mocked as a kind of like queer characteristic. And I thought it was really funny as well when I was thinking about it, when you if the whole thing's kind of like an analogy of like, oh, he's scared to be gay, he doesn't, or his family are kind of scared for him to be gay, he might not be accepted, blah blah blah. But DreamWorks have stopped short of actually, if it was intentional, they've stopped short of actually making him gay, because God forbid he's a gay shark. Whereas Angelina Jolie's character, who I think is also called Angie, the fish,
Of course.
is like the most overtly sexual and sexualized fish ever. That's a weird sentence, but it's true. So I think it's funny, that's that thing, it's such a double standard. Like, Angie can be this overtly sexual, like, gold digger, and you know exactly what she's after. She's not after Will because she, Oscar. She's not after Oscar because she likes him.
I didn't even notice she got the name wrong as well. That fish looks so much like Will Smith. It's so mental that they did that.
Oh, what a movie. But I think it's such like a double standard. So we're allowed to see her as this weird sexual, like, gold digging fish, but they stop short, if that was their intention, they stop short of like Lenny actually being gay, or even acknowledging that he's gay. So I thought that was really funny. What I also thought was funny is that I found this like kind of group thing in America called the American Family Association, and basically they're just a group of like just horrible people who get together and say, this is horrible because of this. So basically they completely bashed Shark Tale because they've got nothing else to do with their life. Yeah, they bashed it. They called it propaganda so that people would think it was okay to be gay. I'm like, what?
Jesus.
I'm like, you guys are getting more angry about this than I think. Do you know what I mean? It's a film about fish and sharks and. But they like properly bashed it and was like, oh, this is disgusting and I can't believe they would allow this to happen. And I'm like, mate, calm down.
Yeah, there are better places to direct that anger.
Yeah. But no, I thought that was funny. Especially embarrassing as it was, I thought it was funny that I was completely like missed it the first 90 million times I've seen it.
Was this, so you only just realised this just like the last like week or two basically?
Yeah.
When was the last time you watched Shark Tale?
Probably like start of the year.
Okay, fair enough. I was gonna say I had like same sort of experience as you, but basically I hadn't seen Shark Tale since I was a kid, and I watched it just before leaving Manchester. So it was like just over 2 years ago basically. And yeah, I remember watching it with my flatmate because we're like hungover and we're like, let's just put something easy on. I think Shark Tale had just gone on Netflix, so we just like stuck it on. And yeah, I remember just sitting there and I was like, oh my God. And I just like completely got like obviously the analogy and completely got what it was, but I'd obviously never noticed it as a kid. And yeah, like you say, it is like screaming the obvious down to like, oh, my son he's dressed as a dolphin. It's just like, and yeah, I then really gave me this like newfound appreciation for the film basically, where I was like, okay, like I never realized that message was in there, but it's so obvious when you're a bit older. And I guess that is, again, there's two sides of this coin, like you sort of say, but I would say from my experience, it was a positive thing, that like moment of realization when I was older. It was nice to kind of go, okay, actually, like they were sort of trying to say something a bit more with this movie than I'd ever realized they were. And again, like I like the fact that like Lenny is like the sort of purest and most lovable character in the film.
Yes.
He's whereas like you have like Will Smith, who's a bit of like a sort of like con artist. He's very sort of selfish, and it's quite funny actually that like Lenny is just like the sort of like heart and soul. You have like Lenny, and then maybe was it Renee Zellweger's character?
Yeah, I can't remember what her name was now.
Yeah, neither can I. But the two of them are maybe like just the sort of the nicest characters. So in that way, it is like a much more positive, obviously, form of like queer representation. And Shark Tale was like, again, to give it the benefit of the doubt, was like early 2000s. So okay, we're jumping. It's a decade later than like these Disney films, but it still is like 20 years ago. And yeah. So I like you say, it's a shame that they don't take it further, but it still feels like the movie was pushing. It feels like it's positive representation this time, and it's not that subtle. Like it's very sort of
for
overt.
for most people.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, like you're saying, it's interesting to hear that obviously the reaction you were talking about, where like what was it, the Association of Families in America, basically.
Oh yeah, the American Family Association.
American
They're going to come
Family
after us.
Yeah. I know, they're never going to be watching this podcast again.
Oh, God damn it.
Our viewership. But yeah, no, like, it's funny because I again just like out of interest, because I obviously picked up on like the sort of queer subtext the last time I watched Shark Tale, but I just out of interest just kind of did a quick Google on like Shark Tale, like queer subtext, and the first article I got was from like obviously when the movie was released, and it was actually a really scathing piece talking about the fact, it talked about a lot of the stuff you said about the fact that why can't he just be gay, like why is that so, and I guess that, and like it mentions the sexualization of like Angelina Jolie's like fish character, and the fact that there is overt sort of sexuality in there, just not homosexual like sexuality, and it talks about just like how screamingly obvious like the sort of like subtext is. The article that I read had one comment, and the one comment was someone going off on a rant because they were just like, I can't believe this. You're looking way too much into things. Why Lenny is explicitly depicted as a vegetarian? Why can't it just be that he's a vegetarian? Why do you have to make every character gay? Why do you have to try and find meaning where there's not? And I just love that it was like,
that's amazing.
The one person that's commented is like sitting so far on the other side of like everything this article was saying, talking about how obvious it is, and it did make me kind of appreciate the fact. I was like, okay, well, it doesn't really matter how obvious your subtext is. There's always going to be people that just don't get it and don't want to get it. But I guess
that's like those like memes and stuff where it's like say female athletes are like talking about their girlfriend or their partner, and people are like, oh, friendship.
Yeah. Yeah, that very much is. That's someone who unironically thinks those things. But yeah, I guess to go back into what we were saying. Yes, I think the upsetting thing, the unfortunate thing, and the problematic thing is that there seems to be this like continual belief that's sort of held by like studios and by producers and whatnot, that homosexuality of any, and even just like people, like sort of conservative valued people, and homophobic people really, that any form of like homosexuality and any like allusions to it, like they seem to view it as something that is like a perversion rather than just being like another form of love, because they wouldn't bat an eyelid at like any like heterosexual romance or any heterosexual characters, but there seems to be this automatic assumption that like like there being like two gay characters, and all of a sudden it's almost like kids are watching The Evil Dead, or they're watching like
100%. Yeah, it's such a weird one, especially with regards to Shark Tale, because like you were saying, Lenny is such a good character. He's like nice in that way where he's sometimes, when movie characters are nice, they're very annoying. He's not. He's just genuinely nice. Yeah. Like there's that amazing bit when he saves that little shrimp.
Yeah.
Like he's just nice. He's just a nice guy. So it's nice to see it where he's not it's not like a kind of nasty representation where sometimes they might present like gay men as being really like catty and things like that. So I think that's definitely got that going for it, that he's, I think they've gone like kind of out of their way to make him like likable and nice. He's not opposite to the villains where they're explicitly bad. Yeah. So that's nice.
Yeah, exactly. I agree all in. Basically, big up Shark Tale. It's about time we talked about it in this podcast and gave it some love.
I don't know how we managed to get 13 episodes in without discussing it, but
well, we had to save it for for the big one. But yeah, no, I very much agree, and there is also an element I do appreciate that obviously like I'm heterosexual, so my opinion probably like doesn't really count for that much, but at the same time, like I mean, a big part of the reason we're discussing this is sort of the next part of this like conversation, the films we're discussing, which was really the reason that I wanted to kind of like to tackle this topic. So obviously we've discussed sort of like, I guess I say older films, they're not that old in like the history of cinema, but like for us personally, they are like older films because we grew up watching them. They came out when we were kids, basically. But yeah, to move on to some sort of more like to sort of, now that we've looked a bit at the past, I felt it was sort of worth looking at where we are today. And to begin with, again, going back to Disney, I thought it would be worth talking about the new Disney Star Wars movies. So again, with regards to, because obviously in the very last Star Wars, the episode 9, there was, I think, the first ever like openly gay moment in like a Star Wars film, which was, so technically that's like a really big thing. But yeah, overall on the new Star Wars films, what are your thoughts, feelings? Did you like, watching them for the first time, did you think anything? Have you like since looked at anything, etc.? I'll stop talking and let you.
I think as you know, I'm a massive Star Wars fan. No, they're not. I'm just not as into them as other people, as some people. But I did enjoy the last 3. But saying that, I do remember watching it, and I do remember the bit that you're talking about, which is like very much blink and you'll miss it kiss between 2 female characters. And I remember watching it the first time and being like, oh, but it was over so quickly that I was just like almost kind of forgot that it had happened.
Yeah.
And I think reading into it more and more, I think this is the worst example for me anyway of like queerbaiting. So basically J.J. Abrams came out and said in an interview, like we were talking before, where people weren't really asked about things, so that they're now, especially I think Disney, because I feel like they maybe do have a responsibility being so big to try and push things forward. There's going to always be people watching Disney movies, so if you put a Disney movie out there with a gay character, X amount of people are guaranteed to see it. Because they've got such a big platform. So basically J.J. Abrams was kind of like alluding to the fact that, oh yeah, we represent everyone in this movie, and there'll definitely be like a gay character and moment in it, and there is, but it's like 2 seconds long.
Yeah. And
the characters, one of them isn't even, we don't ever see the woman again. She's like only in it for that scene for 2 seconds. The other one, I can't even remember the other woman's name. She's like, that's how minor of a character she is.
Yeah.
She is a speaking role, in fairness. So she did get that, but yeah, the idea of J.J. Abrams being like, oh yeah, we're including everyone in this, and for that to be the inclusion is it's more than a little bit of a joke, in my opinion anyway.
No, I agree.
Yeah. I think as well, it kind of, when did the last one come out?
2019.
Do you know off the top of your 2019. Yeah. That was 2 years ago, and they're still... Exactly. And that's how far they've come. It's a bit ridiculous.
Exactly, and I guess when you're talking about the blink and you miss it moment, I'm pretty sure when I saw it, I did miss that bit. But also, full disclosure, I did see the movie in China, which has has.
I wonder if it wasn't there.
Well, that's the thing. So I'm pretty sure that I think they cut it out of the Chinese release. I think they did that with like some of John Boyega's scenes in maybe the 7th one. I know that there was there's some like really dodgy like marketing that like they've done as well, Disney, when it comes with regards to like, the Chinese market, because of how sort of racist and homophobic they are. I know that like if you look at like the Western poster or like the general posters for like Star Wars Episode 7, and then you look at like the or even like The Last Jedi, I think any of them really, and then you look at like the Chinese posters that you use, John Boyega goes from like one of the biggest like heads on the poster to like almost hidden on it. So I think they cut out the lesbian kiss from Episode 9 when I saw it, which again like sort of reinforces just how sort of like small and effectively meaningless it is that you can cut that out of the movie and not even notice it,
and it still be seamless.
Literally, exactly. It doesn't make any difference to like the impact of the film really. It does very much feel like it just feels really patronizing, doesn't it, to have that. It would be different if there was no hype around that moment and then it was just in there. It would have maybe been a bit more like, okay, that's quite nice. But I guess for me, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about the new Star Wars movies is the fact that obviously, I mean, there's so many reports and stories, and a lot of people are very upset about the fact that the new trilogy of movies weren't like properly planned out, and obviously you had like different filmmakers coming in, and originally it was supposed to be 3 different filmmakers doing all 3 of them. They ended up sort of, well, the third filmmaker, I think it was Colin, I can't remember his surname, but he did Jurassic World. He left for like creative differences on Episode 9, and then J.J. Abrams was asked to come back, and so it ended up being this really weird, unplanned mishmash, and there's lots of like contradictions and lots of ways that like it doesn't really feel like the smoothest ride. But I think that kind of led to like a big part of one thing that kind of led to is like in particular in The Force Awakens, you have obviously John Boyega and Oscar Isaac playing like Finn and Poe respectively, and their chemistry is like by far like the most interesting chemistry in like the film. And then same goes for like, they're not even like together in the second one, but their chemistry in the first one is still like so strong that like you are just like kind of desperate to see these characters together again. And it led to obviously the years gap between these movies. And I think even maybe I don't know if there was anything the actress said like back this up as well, but there was a lot of like people very much hoping that there was going to be like a romantic connection between these 2 characters, and the sort of third film, especially as you say, with like a gay moment, a gay like with like representation being promised. It just seemed like a very obvious, like there was like literally more romantic chemistry, like more sort of sexual chemistry with them than there was with like any of the actual like romantic leads in the movies. So it's, and I think that's the frustrating thing is like if it had been a male and a female, then you know Disney wouldn't have hesitated from like following that through and pairing them off together. But it very much feels like, and I think that the problematic thing I found was like it wasn't even really left. It felt like the Rise of Skywalker went out of its way to almost like say that they weren't, and it didn't have a romantic connection. Obviously, like they introduced basically another, funnily enough, another black character for like John Boyega's character to then like have a connection with, and then Oscar Isaac's character meets like an ex-lover, and they have their like romantic, and it just feels like the movie just literally just invents 2 characters just to stop people from like speculating that these 2 should be together. And just that the combination of the 2 things just felt quite insulting and quite disappointing. And it is one of those things, it's like the movies, nowhere in the writing of the movies is like ever promised that these characters would have a relationship. But even Oscar Isaac said in interviews that he really wanted there to be a romantic connection between like Finn and Poe. That he didn't really have any power to do anything about that, but he did sort of push for it. So it just makes it kind of more like, because then that's like confirmation that it's like, okay, this was discussed behind the scenes. It's not like they were like ignorant to it. I mean, there's no way they would have been ignorant to it anyway, but you actually know for a fact that it has been brought up behind the scenes and has been like deliberately shut down. So and
I think as well, with Finn and Poe, I know that a lot of people really hate on like Rey and Kylo Ren, but I definitely think that Finn and Poe kind of made more sense. I feel like Kylo Ren and Rey could have very much been like a platonic thing, because are they not like, spoiler, are they not like cousins or something?
No, they're not. I don't think
they're related in some way.
No, I think it's more just obviously Kylo's related to Darth Vader, and Rey's related to Palpatine. So there's like there's like a connection.
See, I don't know the
there,
Star Wars, like I don't know the whole Star Wars. So that's obviously where I'm getting confused.
That is fair. I mean, there has basically been like hints of incest in the original trilogy. So that's not like far-fetched for you to assume.
Yeah, I think maybe that's kind of what I was getting, more of like a Luke and Leia kind of vibe from them. But obviously I think I think they were maybe a bit like hesitant to be like, oh, we don't just want to rehash that. So I'm like, well, maybe it would have been better if you had.
Yeah, exactly. And it's given that they're trying to like distinguish themselves and make, we're like, oh, we're going in a new direction. It's like, well, they had a really good, fresh direction to go in and a really good, like, fresh way to take some characters. And I think, ultimately it feels like by the end of the third film, it feels like sort of Poe and Finn didn't really go that far as characters. It doesn't feel like they really changed that much. It doesn't feel like that much was really done with them. It doesn't feel like they really knew what they wanted to do with them. So I think overall, I think it's pretty disappointing that they didn't do more. So obviously with Star Wars being discussed, next I thought we'd look at a movie that just came out. I think I'll go for talking about Raya and the Last Dragon first, because I think that came out first. So the next two films came out this year, basically. So the first one we'll talk about is Raya and the Last Dragon. Disney made it, the same studio basically that did like Frozen and Tangled, etc. Again, sort of you watched this movie quite recently. What were your sort of thoughts, feelings with regards to all of this?
I quite enjoyed it. I think it was nice in the same kind of way that Frozen was, where it wasn't, it was almost like refreshing that it wasn't like a kind of, even though she was a princess technically, it wasn't like a typical princess movie. She didn't have like an explicit love interest or like a prince that she was after kind of thing. So that was nice. It definitely felt more of like an adventure movie, which was a bit more fun. But I think this suffers from the same thing with Star Wars, where the two characters that are depicted as having like a friendship, or they're a bit like frenemies in the movie. It might have been more interesting or made maybe more sense if it was like a relationship as opposed to a friendship. And I think it's funny, like we were talking about performance and things. Kelly Marie Tran, who played Rhea, she herself did that thing that we were talking about, where she like just went ahead and played her as if she was I can't remember if she said she thought she was maybe gay or bisexual, but she just went ahead and did it. And I always think that's funny, because I'm like, did the director pick up on that at the time? Were they okay with that? Were they just like, wow, this girl's getting dead into it? But I think it definitely falls into the same kind of issue as Star Wars. But I think the fact that she's gone out of her way to play that character a certain way is telling. Like, their whole all of their interactions are quite flirtatious, and like in the way that it would be if it was like you get movies all the time where it's like heterosexual villain and like protagonist, and they have these kind of like flirty exchanges, and then they go on to fall in love. But this missed the mark on that yet again. Yeah,
and I guess like you say, within the sort of narrative of the movie, the climax has like everyone sort of coming together, and it's all about like their reconciliation, and they're like them going back, them basically building this like connection that they've obviously been enemies for so long, but then like moving past that. And it seemed like a really natural place to then just push it that bit further. And I remember when Frozen came out, and I remember it being really exciting that obviously Elsa in that movie didn't get a love interest, and the movie sort of like subverts the usual like the Disney princess needing like a sort of love interest, and that was really exciting at the time. I remember there being a lot of buzz around that fact, that it's like, okay, it was nice to actually have like a female, just like main female Disney character that didn't just get like saddled off with someone at the end. And I think even the second one still doesn't like give her a love interest, so that I'm glad that they like sort of stuck to that. But I do feel like it's now been like 8 years since Frozen came out, and you kind of I guess you almost expect like, okay, that studio was pushing things a bit, you know, they were sort of breaking the Disney mold then, but it feels like they kind of like broke it to like a safe degree and then they've just stopped there. And like Moana and Frozen 2 and all that, they've all been like, they've been fine. Like, you know, I enjoyed them enough, but it doesn't feel like they've had anywhere near the same impact. And I think a big part of that is the fact that they're not progressing anything. They're not pushing anything anymore. They're playing it like way too safe. And Raya was like a perfect opportunity for them to actually go and have like an openly like queer Disney princess and like Disney protagonist. And I think as well, there is like, going back to like coding and stuff, they use a lot of like sort of like queer coding with, was it Namari? Down to the haircut and sort of muscular build and just like, the way they act and even like some of the lines and stuff like that. And it's just, it is frustrating to just like, because I for the most part like quite enjoyed the movie and stuff, but it does feel like it would have really, it feels like the perfect place to have done that, to push that, and it would have, I think it would have been really impactful. And yeah, again, it's a Disney movie, like people were going to see it anyway. Like it's not like, especially with it being released on Disney Plus and stuff, it's not like people aren't going to watch it. Like you could
because it wasn't even like the Premier Access thing, you could watch it straight away. Like I think that's what's really annoying about this, is that Disney, like, surely at this stage have more money than is even like a physical thing. So I'm like, surely if your movie, if it doesn't do well in China or Dubai or something like that, it's surely you putting that out there is more important than losing money in these places. Like it's
exactly like they can afford, they're big enough that they can afford to do something new and take the hit if it doesn't, and they don't even know for a fact that it's not going to, like, I mean, it probably, like, you know, okay, in countries where these things are almost like criminalized or whatever, then it's probably is going to struggle a bit. But at the same time, like, sometimes, you know, the movies that like deliberately pander to these markets completely flop in them anyway. Like why not just embrace that for once but just do it for the sake of change. And I think the thing is as well is like attitudes, like these attitudes that we obviously have like keep bringing up and keep discussing, and like the American Family Association, and like these like views of like homosexuality as like a perversion, LGBT is like something dirty and wrong. I think a big part of that comes from the fact that like you're still not seeing representation. It's
hidden.
Yeah.
So
like,
that kind of instantly makes it like, if things are hidden away, they're kind of like like you're saying, like kind of dirty or bad or things like that. Like, we don't discuss that, or you wouldn't discuss other kind of horrible things. Yeah. Exactly.
And I think if you start including, and it's people that are like, that will say, oh, like, I don't mind the gays, I just don't like seeing it in public. It's like, well, that's
I don't want to see that. Like,
exactly. But it's like, it's like you see men and women kissing all the time, and it's
that gives everyone the bulk as well.
Exactly. It's disgusting, but it's disgusting always. Affection's gross. Bring back long live face masks and distancing. But I do think that like that is like if you start including representation in these films, in these kids films, I think you would then see like a really positive shift in attitudes with like people growing up and whatnot.
Definitely. And I think we're definitely past the whole the idea that you can make people gay. Like, that's not how it works.
Exactly.
Making it like, if Rhea had been gay, do you know what I mean? That wouldn't.
Yeah, I feel comfortable that I wouldn't
caused anything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel quite comfortable that I'd have come out heterosexual on the other side. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't feel like, or how Rhea. We wouldn't be doing a podcast called "How Rhea and the Last Dragon Changed Me."
Yeah, exactly.
But no. So on that note, let's go to the very last film that we're discussing, the sort of latest one, I believe, which is the Disney Pixar effort, Luca. Once again, what are your thoughts, feelings?
This one, this is actually funny because I haven't seen the movie, but it very much reminded me of Call Me By Your Name, because it's got a very similar kind of setting. It's got the same, just kind of like, even though I haven't seen the movie, it feels like the same kind of thing. This kind of like, just these two guys, or in this case two boys, like in this Italian setting. And I think when I was reading more into Luca in particular, I thought it was interesting that they released it during Pride Month. Yeah, I think this one was very queer baity, maybe more so than the other ones, with the exception of Star Wars. Where it was released during Pride Month, it was a lot of the trailers and stuff were just featuring this kind of really close friendship with Luca and his friend, whose name is Roberto.
Oh,
Alberto.
Alberto, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a hard one because like queer coding and queerbaiting and that's difficult because if you choose to watch it with a kind of like heteronormative gaze or whatever, you do just see like a friendship. But then if you watch it, the more you kind of look into it, when I was reading about it, people were talking about how, again, like kind of like Shark Tale, where he has to hide his relationship with Alberto from his parents. He doesn't want them to know. And then both of them have to hide what they are to everyone in the village, to their pal's dad. And I think that this is, again, just one of those cases where they just didn't want to take that final little step and actually make them gay. And what I read was really interesting was that there's still this kind of assumption that being gay is instantly related to like sex, whereas people's objections are, oh, but they're little boys. But I'm like, but some little boys, you can be gay without being sexually active, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't need to be them. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't need to be them being sexual. It could just be that they're attracted to each other, that they're in love. Do you know what I mean?
Because romantic love and sexual love is often like defined as like they're often like defined as separate things anyway. Yeah. And like there's different forms of intimacy and connections, and like you say, like I think that is an important thing to recognise. Is like it's a movie about two little boys, but at the same time, like there are plenty of movies out there with like kids, again heterosexual, who do have like a romantic connection. And it's not, the movie manages to do just fine without showing them banging. They're not suddenly gonna start doing that with like the wee Italian boys. But I completely agree. This was for me like the impetus for this podcast was watching Luca. And I, like, to be honest, I didn't watch any of the marketing. I had seen, like, I knew pretty much nothing about this movie going in. I knew that it was a Pixar movie. I saw that it was getting like a little bit of buzz before it was released, and then I saw that it didn't get like amazing reviews. I was like, well, I don't even know what the buzz is for. But so I was like, I'll stick it on and just see what I kind of think. And it was like when I guess that shot of like Luca and Alberto like staring out over like the sunset, and then like
and they're like
the arm around the other, and then the other one puts the arm around like back, and that was when I was suddenly like, okay, like, and I genuinely thought the movie was going to see that through, because I was like, that felt like a statement of intent. It felt like the movie then had like a sort of clear direction that it was going in, something that it was going to sort of do and say, but it kind of just doesn't. And it's, as you say, I think it's really frustrating how much the movie has this message of as you say, like Luca and Alberto having to hide from the rest of the village and being different, and I guess like passing effectively, and then obviously like the sort of like the climax of the movie really is like them coming out to everyone and revealing who they really are and being accepted for that. But it's like the movie has that message, but then the movie also is hiding what it is.
The movie's like, don't hide who you are. It's okay to be who you are. And then they're like, but we're not going to do that.
Exactly. But us explicitly saying these characters are gay. And I did also feel like, once again, the movie's like resolution with like Luca going to school and like sort of leaving Alberto, that to me kind of felt a bit like almost forced and a bit out of nowhere. I know that they do kind of set up that he has this interest and like he's like curious and stuff like that, and he sort of takes to like their friends, I can't remember her name, Giulietta. They take to like her.
I think it's just Julia.
Julia. They take to her, because they call her Spelia, don't they? They take
Kids are so cruel.
Aren't they
Although it's a
just?
grown man that calls her that, isn't it?
Human beings are so cruel.
Yeah.
But there is like a bit of like sort of setup for it, but it did very much feel like it just, I guess, it just kind of didn't feel like the payoff that the movie really needed to have. It felt like a weird thing to sort of separate Alberto and Luca, and I think all in, I was left by the end of the movie. I was just like, I can't believe that they were so on the nose again with like their sort of theme and message, but then literally just didn't miss.
I think
like,
especially like you get properly bashed over the head with it at one point when the grandma's like, oh, there'll be people that don't accept him for who he is. But I'm like, could that be any more explicit? But what she's talking about is that he's a sea monster.
Exactly.
Like, you were so close, and you did. Yeah, the story was there. You just missed one integral part of it. And that was it.
And it would have been like a small change that ultimately wouldn't have like, it would have impacted. You could have had effectively just one small. Again, as we were talking about the difference of like a few seconds, that like lesbian kiss in Star Wars. It would have just been like a couple seconds of like confirmation, but the movie's done so much like groundwork in this instance that it would have felt like the natural payoff, whereas like you have Rise of the Skywalker where it's like there's no setup for it and it doesn't feel like a payoff to anything, it just feels like a token inclusion. But this to me is just, it now just kind of feels sort of tiresome. It doesn't feel like the movie, it doesn't feel like movies are being clever anymore with like queer coding and queer baiting and like they're like the subtext being there. It just feels like, come on, like there's so many like Disney movies, there's so many Disney Pixar movies and Pixar's
normally like spot on. Like the last episode when we were talking about Pixar, but it's just infuriating that they get so far and then they're like, nah,
exactly,
like they absolutely chicken out, and it's, for a company the size of Disney, it's infuriating. Exactly.
It's not gonna damage their brand. So, like the conservative folk that don't like it, again in this day and age when you have like the movies, you have Disney Plus and you have movies that you're like, so many movies to like choose from at your fingertips, at your remote. So many movies, like even during the pandemic, there's still like a collection of movies out in cinemas that you can go see, even with like scaled back releases and stuff. There's always going to be other things that these people can watch. Like there's no way in hell that like if Disney releases like an openly gay kids movie that like conservative like people are going to stop watching Disney movies. Like it's just not going to happen.
Exactly.
Whereas it actually would make a huge difference to the people that are like craving this representation and that are really, really looking out for it.
Surely, like it wouldn't be the same, but you would lose X amount of people, but then you would gain also a huge amount of people because they're finally being represented.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? And you would go and see it to like support people that you knew that were LGBT. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
and I think for instance with like a movie like Luca, I don't think it's the top of anyone's like Pixar lists. I don't think it's like I don't think it's a movie that's going to be like really celebrated and watched over and over for years to come. But if it had actually included that element, then I think it would have. I think it would have at the very least attained like a cult status, and I think there actually would have been a bigger crowd for it, and I think there would have been
definitely
more going on around it. So I think in that instance, the movie actually sacrificed success for the sake of conformity. Which
that's such a good point, because it was alright, but it was a bit bland. The movie, and I think that would definitely have just. I think because as well you were maybe waiting for it, you were just waiting the whole time, and then it didn't happen, so there was no big payoff. You just kind of felt like it did feel a bit robbed by the end of the movie. Did feel like, okay, the movie was building to something that then just never happened. That scene of Alberto running after the train wasn't quite the Luca Alberto ending we wanted. Very true.
But yes, on that note, I feel like it's probably a good place to wrap up. Do you have any like sort of final thoughts, opinions, anything you wanted to bring up?
I don't think so. I think that was really interesting. I think as well, when you go into like analysing a movie or researching a movie with a specific idea, it's always really interesting to see instances in how that's actually in place in the movie and stuff like that. So yeah, no, I thought it was a super interesting topic and very topical.
Thank you very much. Well, yeah, no, thank you for discussing it with me, because yeah, after watching Luca, I was like,
yeah,
I need to voice these opinions, and it was a lot of fun to do so, and to just kind of wind our way up through the years as well, and of course get to talk about Shark Tale in all its glory.
Of course, what more could you want?
Exactly.
If only I'd managed to sneak Zootropolis in there somewhere, but there's always next week.
Yeah, exactly. You never know when it's coming, but you do know what is coming.
Exactly. But no, that was really good. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. So obviously next time we meet, it'll be Catherine who's hosting Catherine's topic of discussion, which I am very much looking forward to. And until then, thank you very much for watching, and farewell.
See ya.